Picture this. We're looking at an ancient text today that reads, honestly, exactly like a modern stealth thriller. We've got a massive manhunt, a super dangerous nighttime infiltration, and at the dead center of the whole shebang, an absolutely impossible choice. So, put yourself in our protagonist's shoes for a second. Imagine being a fugitive. You're being relentlessly pursued by your absolute worst enemy, someone with huge resources who literally wants nothing more than to see you dead. Now imagine you stumble upon that exact enemy, fast asleep, completely vulnerable, and entirely at your mercy. What do you do?
Well, that brings us to part one, the hunt in the wilderness.
Our story kicks off with a tip-off. A group known as the Ziphites goes straight to King Saul and betrays David's location. They tell the king, hey, David's hiding in the hill of Hachilah, and this just launches this intense, high-stakes cat and mouse game. Saul mobilizes immediately, marching right down to the wilderness of Ziph, and he actually pitches his camp exactly where David is supposed to be. David realizes the net is closing in, so he sends out spies to, confirm the threat. And the sheer scale of the threat David is facing here, it's staggering. Saul doesn't just bring a little search party. No, he brings an elite, overwhelming force of 3,000 chosen men of Israel. To put that into perspective, that's 3,000 elite soldiers mobilized just to hunt down one single rival out in the wilderness.
Which leads us to section 2, a stealth mission by night.
Now, confronted by a literal army of 3,000 men, you'd probably think David's only option is to run deeper into the wild, right? But instead, he decides to completely flip the script. He executes this incredibly dangerous covert operation right into the heart of the enemy camp. First, he scouts the layout, figuring out exactly where Saul and Abner, the captain of his host, have set up their trench. Seeing an opening, David asks for a volunteer. A guy named Abishai boldly steps up, saying, I'll go down with you. And together, they breach the perimeter of a 3,000-man encampment, all under the cover of night. And against all odds, they actually bypass the guards. They creep right into the very center of the camp and find the king fast asleep. The text gives us this wonderfully vivid detail. Saul is sleeping within the trench, with his captain Abner and all the troops lying around him. And right there, stuck into the ground by Saul's head, his bolster, is his spear. So here we are at part 3, the ultimate moral dilemma. Standing there in the pitch dark, directly over the sleeping king, who has literally made his life a living hell, our infiltrators face a massive ethical crossroads. It brilliantly illustrates the tension between these two guys. Abishai is all about pragmatism. He whispers that God has delivered the enemy right into their hands, and he practically begs for permission to take that spear and just strike Saul to the earth. One strike, and the war is over. Boom. But David operates on a totally different wavelength, on principle. He insists, destroy him not. He firmly believes you just cannot murder the Lord's anointed king and walk away guiltless. David elaborates with his really powerful reasoning. He basically declares that ultimate justice, that belongs entirely to the Lord. He says that the Lord will strike Saul down, or maybe he'll die a natural death when his time comes, or he'll fall in battle. But David draws a hard line in the sand. It is absolutely not his place to stretch out his hand and assassinate the king. So the crucial point is what happens next. David completely refuses to take Saul's life, but he still needs to prove he was actually there. So he tells Abishai to grab a couple of specific items. They take physical proof of his mercy, Saul's spear, which remember was stuck right in the ground, and the cruse of water sitting right by the king's head. With the items in hand, they slip away into the night completely undetected. And the source material highlights this truly fascinating detail. No one saw them, no one knew about it, and absolutely no one woke up. Why? Well, because a divinely induced deep sleep from the Lord had fallen upon the entire military camp. It kept them completely oblivious to the whole infiltration. Moving on to section 4, shouting across the valley. Okay, having safely secured the high ground on a hill a good distance away, David transitions out of stealth mode. He's ready for a super tense psychological confrontation. Shouting across this massive space, he actually zeroes in not on Saul, but on Abner, the captain of the guard. And he mercilessly mocks Abner for what is, frankly, the worst bodyguard performance in history. He sarcastically asks, "Are you not a valiant man?" and demands to know why Abner just let someone waltz right into the camp to destroy the king. He points out Abner deserves to die for this catastrophic security breach, telling him to look and see exactly where the king's spear and water cruse went. Now all this shouting wakes the king. Saul recognizes David's voice, and David immediately pleads his case. He asks what evil he has actually done to deserve being hunted like this. And he uses this striking metaphor, comparing himself to a flea and then to a partridge, which is just a small ground-dwelling bird. He's really pointing out the utter absurdity of the whole situation. Like, why is the powerful king of Israel mobilizing an army of 3,000 men to hunt down something so completely insignificant out in the mountains?
Which brings us to our final act, Section 5. The king confesses.
Confronted by the undeniable physical proof of his missing spear, the missing water cruse, and honestly, David's astonishing restraint, Saul's entire perspective just shatters. In this shocking, completely disarming moment of clarity, the king openly breaks down and confesses his wrongdoing. He literally says, "I have sinned." He recognizes that David valued his life that night, and he plainly admits, "I have played the fool and have erred exceedingly." And then he promises to do David no more harm. But look at how David responds here. Proving his complete lack of malice and cementing his own integrity, David doesn't even keep the weapon as a trophy or, as leverage. He simply points out the spear and instructs one of Saul's young men to cross the valley and retrieve it. This all builds to David's ultimate philosophy. He declares that just as he showed incredible mercy and heavily valued Saul's life that day, he trusts that the Lord will value his life. Notice the nuance here. He doesn't ask Saul for protection. Instead, he asks the Lord to deliver him out of all tribulation. The intense confrontation just entirely diffuses. Saul, the very man who brought 3,000 soldiers to kill him, ends up blessing David, acknowledging that David will do great things and ultimately prevail. And with that, the hunt ends. The text tells us David went on his way, and Saul returned to his place. So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a provocative thought. Abishai represented the ruthless pragmatism that our world honestly so often rewards, right? Taking the easy, brutal way out when the opportunity strikes. But David chose a much harder path. When you hold all the cards against an adversary, how does showing mercy and radical integrity change the outcome of your own story? It is definitely a fascinating question to ponder. Thanks for diving into this with me, and keep exploring.